Okay, hello and welcome to our session Metadata for the Masses. We're going to try and help you solve the empty data catalog problem. We're going to shoehorn that into a bit of a pirate analogy, but hopefully you get the idea. You can see that there'll be a little bit of general artificial intelligence used throughout some of our presentations today. I haven't been to a beach with Siobhan recently, but the whole point of this is that metadata in our analogy is the map that helps you find ultimately your treasure, which is hopefully the data. Better metadata can help discovery. And for those of you who have been in this industry for a little while, I don't need to give you too much detail, but basically metadata is data about data. You can use it to help discover your data. You can use it to understand more about it, to understand whether it's going to be fit for purpose. The Association for Geographic Information talk about the FAIR principles, and you can find some interesting updates and information on AGI's website about findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable terminology used in conjunction with having good, solid metadata. This isn't a new topic. Those of you, as I say, have been in the geospatial industry for a while, have heard all sorts of metadata terminology come through over the years. You'll have heard about UK metadata, UK Gemini, which is the metadata standard for the more broad INSPIRE directive, which is the European metadata standard. If it was a few years ago, if it was 2016, we would be giving you a very similar scenario to the one we're going to touch on today, but we're going to enhance it a little bit. The focus then, I mean, I've worked on metadata projects in the past. This particular example was for a local government organization that had an Oracle spatial database, a myriad of data tables containing a lot of their authorities' information, both spatial and tabular data, a real mix. They also used some embedded Oracle forms that they'd built in order to help kind of enrich and capture information about the data that they were storing in their database. Their intention was to adhere to the UK Gemini spec and to load a database table with some high-level metadata elements. These words here refer to metadata elements that describe a data set. With very traditional tools in FME, you can use the toolkit and have been able to use the toolkit for a very long time to scrape information about your information. And you can go into the database and populate content in a dedicated metadata table, and hopefully that will aid your discovery of your treasure, your data. The reality can sometimes be a little bit different. One of the challenges that this particular local authority had at the time was kind of impressing the importance of data ownership and understanding the legacy that a data set has. And obviously, if you can get some data ownership, then hopefully that data set will be maintained better into the future. They put together some forms. The downside was that when they posted them out there, whilst a lot of people want to have good quality data, they don't necessarily want to own the maintenance of it because it's the less interesting task. But ultimately, it helps the data set be used and be discovered. I have to say the challenge relates to some very specific areas, though. You'll see that the elements that we've marked up in red here happen to be the ones that probably take a little bit more thought to put together, and they're harder to, with traditional tools in FME, they're harder to scrape that information. So it's not easy to write an abstract that describes a data set adequately with an automated routine. Generating keywords, you could probably do a little bit of that, but actually that's also quite tough. And deciphering what the topic or the category of data set that you're working with can also be a little bit more difficult using the kind of mainstay old school technology in FME. But today, the whole point of this presentation is we've got a new tool that can help us in this case. And of course, it's artificial intelligence, and we can kind of sprinkle that into our orchestration to add a little bit of extra capability to our metadata workflow. The important thing to say is because we've got FME, we don't need to care about where your data is. So in this scenario, instead of Oracle Spatial, we've got the data in an Esri file geodatabase, and we've used the data owner's Survey 123 forms to help capture some broader information for this particular data set. Here's our usual metadata spec. And in this case, what we're going to do is we'll use some traditional tools in FME to go and get things like a unique ID. The date of the metadata is created, the language it's being written in, some of the more spatial aspects for spatial data, so things like the bounding box, min x, max, min x, min y, max x, max y to give us bottom left and top right corners. Things like the coordinate system that's stored inside the data set. They're all things that we can gather automatically. We can go to the data owner and get them to fill in a little bit of detail about the data set, but we can start to rely on them a little less because we can use other tools. So in this case, we have the ability to call out to an AI service of your choice to go and gather some broader details. And that will help us fill in some of those more complicated values, some of those more subjective free text fields like an abstract, like alternative titles, like keywords, and importantly, also like the categorization or the classification of the data set, which we can feed information about the data set to the AI service that we're using, and it can help us categorize that data set appropriately. And what we want to advocate for a lot of our general workflows is that we bring in this human in the loop approach where somebody steps in to this publication process to moderate the data, the metadata, before it gets published. And you might do that a particular percentage. You don't have to do 100% moderation, but the idea here is that whilst any AI techniques are, kind of the first step in an organization, it is useful to have some form of moderation to make sure that you're comfortable with what is being produced and stored in your data containers. And we get the same result, same workflow. Just before my colleague Siobhan steps in, there's a couple of bits of terminology that we'll refer to in the rest of the session. Human in the loop, I've already touched on. The element of bringing in some human judgment to make sure that we're comfortable with what we're producing. The other terminology, most of you will have heard of already is prompt engineering. Writing an appropriately structured prompt in order to ask an AI service for an answer is an art form. Google have put together a really interesting article that might help you, and it's worth having a look at that. But Siobhan will touch on some of these additional prompting techniques that we can deploy here. So I'm just going to switch over to Siobhan. Thank you.
Cool. Perfect. Thanks, Dave. So as Dave has gone over how we kind of used to solve the metadata issue, let's have a look at our new solution now with FME and in a bit more detail. So the problem, we all know the problem. We have environments full of massive data sets that look exactly like the screenshot on the bottom right of the screen, with no meaningful descriptions. Our tags are empty, our summaries blank. We might have field names that have cryptic abbreviations that no one can understand. Creating metadata is time consuming, becomes quite tedious and inconsistent, and at the bottom of our ever growing to-do list. So overall it's just neglected and leaves us with poor metadata quality. So the impact with poor metadata quality is not just about being tidy. Our search effectiveness plummets, so we can't discover the data, you can't use it. In business context, if a data set isn't used, it's to be perceived to be of no value, and we're sitting on assets that we don't really know exist. So we have limited data control, especially with that important data ownership of our data sets. And so without that, a new user can come into our system and will never understand what the purpose of the content of the data is. So how do we fix this without a million people trying to help us create good metadata? We've got a workflow that is in two parts: systematically discovers and understands our data and its content before generating metadata that a human can review before finally updating that data set. Most importantly here, today we're taking to ArcGIS Online, for that should be to any data environment or any collection of data sets you have that you want to have that metadata generated for. And then also today we're using our AI service to enhance and create that metadata, but that should be to any AI service, whether that's proprietary model like Google or OpenAI, or maybe a local large language model like using Olama, where you can keep that data secure and offline and don't send anything off to a third party. The key benefits here are that it's schema agnostic, so you're able to adapt it to whatever data the FME reads in. And you also have that human in the loop workflow that Dave highlighted, where we're monitoring the content that the AI suggests. So AI can generate that content, but it's up to us to approve it. So our workflow, that first workspace that we have, first of all, establishes that connection to AGOL or to our data environment before reading in those services. We then extract our data into a Parquet format, and we're integrating it with DuckDB to summarize our data. That data then is being fed to our AI service to be generated before finally being written out into a summary worksheet. So what that looks like in here, this is just a key part of that first workflow that extracted. So that schema scanner reads the schema and joins it to our data. So we join our schema up with our data before writing that out into a Parquet file. We then use a SQL executor on the far right here to do some query on that data in that Parquet file. So in here we have a DuckDB database with an in-memory connection. So we're able to query that Parquet file directly without having to utilize a massive database or connect to anything else, all done within the memory of the computer. And that SQL query within there is generating a summary of the Parquet file. So we're understanding things like the minimums, the maximums, the field types, the number of unique, how many nulls are in there. So we're able to give the AI that contextual awareness of the data set. So it doesn't just know that there's a field called height, it might know that there's a field called height that ranges from 10 meters to 50 meters, rather than from 50 to a million meters. So it has that context of what that data is actually about. So looking out and zooming out to the entire workspace here, we see in the middle we have that green box and that Parquet and SQL query. And this big part in the middle, what we're doing here is generating our summary description and our tags, so that bulk metadata that we're familiar with. We have the two blue boxes here, so we're able to generate new metadata from scratch where there was no previous metadata, or if we had pre-existing metadata, to enhance it or maybe spell check it for us as well, so we can review as well as create from scratch. At the bottom here, we're creating the field description and aliases. Where we have those cryptic field names, we're able to generate field aliases for our fields with the AI service, as well as a description for what each field is about. And then at the top here, we are able to also read in any attachments from our ArcGIS Online feature services. So if there's an image associated with the feature service, we can read in those images, and that can be used as additional context for our metadata. And finally, at the end, let's write that into a report for a human to review. So, like Dave also highlighted, the AI is only listed as the instructions or the prompts that we give it. So first of all, what we're doing here is we're setting the scene for what we want the AI service to be doing for us, and that we want it to review our metadata or create new metadata. We're feeding in those attributes from FME. So we have our feature service title name, the existing summary description and tags. And importantly here, we can also feed in prompt information. So if there's any contextual industry jargon, anything from your business that you might need to include about acronyms, what the data is about, we can add that into our prompt. And we can also add things in, like we want it to be written in British English, we want to have markdown styling for the web. We also can provide and be strict around the kind of format and look and feel we want that metadata to have. So in this case, we might want it to have the Gemini metadata standards, so that it adheres to our UK metadata standards. Our second part of this prompt here, we're describing what we want it to produce for us. So in this case, we want it to produce our summary, so 256 character summary and description of what we want, what our data set is about. We also have our description where it can go into a bit more detail around what it contains. And then finally, we have our tags at the bottom here. That is a separated list of uniquely kind of identifiable things about our data set. At the very bottom here, you'll see that inputting that JSON output. So from our SQL query, that summary information of our metadata to give it that context for what data holds. So from there, we can generate metadata. So the update isn't going to automatically be pushed to ArcGIS Online. We first of all want to have that human in the loop to validate and check what's been created. So we can kind of work out if we like it, if it's hallucinated anything, if it's missed any nuances, and we can approve it and set that status to from created to approved before any changes are made. So once it's been scrutinized, it can go to workspace number 2. So that reads in that workspace, that spreadsheet, look at the approval filtering and update that metadata online before updating that report to say that it's been updated. And here, an important part of the workspace is the ArcGIS Online connector. So that action there is to set details. So it's a fairly new kind of part of the AGOL connector. We can set the metadata details from this one transformer. So we can feed in those tags, that summary, that descriptions, and a bounding box information for our AGOL feature service and automatically generate and update that metadata for us. So what's the result? On the left here, we have our before, our missing metadata, our missing and empty description tags, summary. And so in the end, we have nice service level metadata for summary, our tags, our description all filled in with that context information around offshore wind farms. We can take it a step further with field level metadata. So we can change the triptych field names like name prop to the proposed wind farm name based on the data that we've fed into it. So with that, we can kind of generate our metadata to be more and help our data sets to be more discoverable and become more valuable assets overall.
Okay, and we think this technique is a useful approach. In a couple of scenarios, you might be very early on in your metadata journey and not have any at all or not much at all. We think this approach is a way of giving you some metadata rather than none at all. And what it'll do is give you something that can help your end users discover the data sets that you've got access to that you may want to publish either within your organization or into the public domain. If people are discovering the data sets, you'll get some metrics on usage, but also feedback on the quality and allow you to put iterative data quality workflows in place to improve either the metadata or the actual data content itself, because people are starting to use it. If you already have some form of metadata, this is a really interesting technique, as Siobhan's mentioned, because you can incorporate into the workflow the discovery of the metadata that you already have in order to enrich and improve it, to take you from having good metadata to great metadata. And that means that your end user is going to get a better experience, and hopefully you're going to have an easier time as a data manager, because you're bringing in that hive of individuals who have some form of ownership, not just the data owners, but the users are going to be able to help contribute as well. And we've done a fair few iterations of this with different clients now, looking at different data store types and varying degrees of metadata understanding within an organization and quantity of metadata that's stored. So we'd be very happy to help you on your metadata journey using some of these FME and AI orchestration techniques to help you get a bit of a jump on your metadata. The ultimate plan here is that you have some good metadata to help your data be discovered and used, and that's the end game here. We're hopeful that you found this interesting. You can reach us, get in touch with us at the details here. uk@avinion-tenzing.com is a good general email to contact us on. But thank you very much from myself, David Eagle, and Siobhan Ryan. Thank you.